I'm here on East Street in San Bernardino, and like many main streets in America, East Street has its own stories, its own traditions. The town of San Bernardino was purchased by the Church of Latter-day Saints from the Lugo family. The Santa Ana River, which is less than a mile away from here, carried a tremendous amount of water through this area. The area had amazing access to water, open space. All the right economic factors were in place for San Bernardino. Right where I'm standing was a lake. It was called Lake Urbita. Here we are at Lake Urbita. When I was in college, I had one of the greatest professors. Gordon Clopine was a consulting engineer on the Inland Center project. Him and a team of engineers were approached and they were asked to determine how was it best to reclaim the swamp, which was a justification for covering up Lake Urbita. The gentleman who consulted on this recommended that the city build a moat. This story is so memorable and so important to the larger story that we're telling here today on East Street. That story is one of choices that communities make. In the 1960s, choices were being made all throughout the country by communities they were making decisions that would really affect, even today, what those communities look like. The choice was between keeping your old downtowns and your old structures intact and revitalizing those, maybe at a time in the future where it was more economically viable, or tearing down and starting new. Now, I know many of you that grew up in 1970s and 80s spent a lot of time in shopping malls. That became part of the culture of shopping malls. But those shopping malls came out of a calculated decision by people that really valued profit over the communities they lived in. Inland Center Mall was part of the future, and now, while still functioning, is kind of a ghost of what it used to be.
Look at it this way. Now you got three choices. One,
National Orange Show, it's a history that deserves a telling of its own. But just to say right here where we're at, the Orange Show has been running for over 100 years. It's celebrated the citrus industry. So San Bernardino every year had a fair, a huge fair. The Orange Show has undergone a lot of changes over the years, and it's not as popular as it once was. But it is still a reminder of that heritage and that past that is represented here on East Street. At the Orange Show was the Swing Auditorium that hosted legendary acts, the Rolling Stones, Frank Zappa.
you chicken out. In that case, they'll let ants tie you to the car and drag you around a little bit, and you don't want that, right? 2.
This area had a lot of activity, and that was really centered around the cruising era. One of the most memorable movies from when I was a child was American Graffiti, that romanticized that cruising era, but really showed a lot of it in its actual life, because George Lucas, who grew up in Modesto, was part of that culture. As you travel further north on East Street, you come across the Brandon Iron, a historic and legendary country western bar. Drew the likes of Willie Nelson and Ricky Nelson, no relation, Freddie Fender, who was one of my mom's favorites. In the early 1970s, this area of East Street filled with cruising cars and people walking up and down night and day, people living in the area. a very lively area. East Street, about the time that the malls are getting built, they started cracking down on cruising. These yellow pickets here were installed as they narrowed the road over the years and created a barrier for cruisers. That things like cruising were vilified and then eventually outlawed. For whatever the justifications are given for that, that took away a vital and important part of the community life for both young people and the businesses that thrive.
You foul up and hosting here, Jin. Well, you don't want that, right?
This was the old Harris building that was to be attached to a new development known as Central City Mall. It is an old, beautiful piece of architecture. It was, I believe, a 3-story building, and it had a cafe, and it had a beauty salon, and all the things that a department store from that time would have. Here we are in front of the Harris building, which again has seen better days along East Street. It never really fulfilled the promise of what was stated in the 1970s. A rebranding came with it, and it became the Carousel Mall. And the Carousel Mall slowly dwindled in importance until today. We have an abandoned building that takes up a significant part of downtown San Bernardino. The Harris Company store anchored Central City Mall, later Carousel Mall, in an attempt to revitalize an area that was thought to be out of date. But the historic buildings that still make up part of East Street, you have to look to find them. But those historic buildings are still standing. Most of them still have tenants and are functioning. Unlike the Carousel Mall.
3.
All these old buildings that line this area and the Harris Company anchoring them, there was an opportunity to revitalize that area, but the choice was made to abandon it, to tearing down the old, to build something new, and that is something new. How do you deal with this? We've come full circle. The city of San Bernardino is in talks to demolish Central City Mall and start all over again.
You are successful. And you join the Pharaohs with a car code and a blood initiation and all that? Huh? What? Wait a minute. What's blood initiation?
The Central City Mall behind me, that is now an empty shell of its former self. The government buildings that have been built here and parking lots along East Street, where it once thrived an amazing culture. California was the home of cruising culture, fast food, and the use of the automobile, and for good or bad, whatever opinion you have on it, that's part of our heritage.
Stand by for justice!